how can Essence help with a transformation or cultural change within an organization? So we know that Essence is all about improving teams, especially improving teams through their way of working, and about optimizing how they apply the practices that they've chosen. So how does that relate to transformations and cultural change? Now, for transformations, it's a little bit more straightforward. We can use Essence to describe the practices that make up the desired end state of our transformation. So we can, if it's, say, for example, transforming to a Scrum at Scale organization, we can say, well, here's what Scrum at Scale is, here's how it works, here's the practices, here's the things that we track, here's the products that we create. However, transformations are rarely just about changing to a different way of working. They're normally about some kind of mindset or cultural change as well. So let's think a little bit about culture. So culture is a product of mindset and behaviors and habits. It's what people do that drives the culture of an organization. Now, mindset and behaviors result from practices and ways of working. Now, this isn't always obvious to people, but when you think about it, what I do and the habits that I bring to the workplace are driven by the way that I work. And if I can define the way I work, or I'm following a defined way of working, it kind of follows that that way of working, consciously or unconsciously, is informing the mindset and the behaviors that result in that. And I can certainly influence how I behave based on the practices that I'm following. If my practices include within their definition, not just create this document, go to this meeting, but also bring in, when I'm creating this document, I should be applying these principles and values. When I go to this meeting, I should be applying these principles and values. Then we can start to see the connection between cultural change and Essence. Because if I've got practices that have those principles and values at their heart, I can start doing some really clever things. So, as it says on the right, for culture to change, the practices must also change. It's very rare that we have a cultural change when all the ways of working are the same, and Essence will help those ways of working be understood and applied well. But this is the important bit. This is that connection at a principles and values level. So good practices also include the values and the principles that are necessary for those practices to be applied successfully. And sometimes we've got some practices that are largely about mindset. You know, psychological safety is a good example where a lot of that is about getting in place the right environment and getting people thinking in the right way, rather than just running some activities and creating some documents. So the other thing that we have with transformation is this balance of autonomy and alignment. And we talk about this in the sense that there's a bit of a tension. A team very often wants control and agency over how they work. They believe they know their work best, and they're probably right. An organization wants consistency in how its teams work. They want to know whether teams are doing well or poorly. They want to be able to sometimes compare teams. They certainly want to be able to look at the outcomes of teams or the outputs of teams and see if they're likely to be delivering the strategic aims that the organization expects them to. So how can Essence help with that? So one way is about using Essence and using the kernel to decide what is it that is important that teams are consistent with or report in the same way. And let's start with that. So let's take a core set of activities that are the ones that everybody must follow. Now, we might just start with a few of the bits of the kernel. So these are some of the kernel alphas. So in this example, what I care about knowing is how well are my team doing with their stakeholders? How far progressed is their opportunity? How far progressed are their requirements? And how are they as a team? What's their way of working? That might be where I want to start. That might be okay. I don't really need to care too much about the team or the work or the software system. Let's just focus on these ones. So, and that might be because in the past, we've had challenges with teams neglecting stakeholders once the work starts. So let's focus on that stakeholders alpha and make sure that they're getting that bit right. And that's the common ground and the alphas and the states. Maybe on top of that, we say, do you know what? In this organization, we've got certain things that we want you to follow. We've got some templates, maybe for reporting or for risk. We've got corporate values, and maybe there's some approaches that we like. So let's add those into the set of things that everybody must do. And maybe there's a couple of things on top of that. Maybe we want to say, we expect you to be doing some form of continuous improvement. So any kind of agile retrospective is good. And maybe there's a compliance practice that is important for us. That might be the extent of my alignment. That might be the extent that I've decided every team must do this. But you'll notice from that list, there's lots that is up to the teams. It doesn't say they must use Scrum or Kanban or Prince or anything. It's up to them. Now, what I might do is say, well, let's have an ecosystem of other practices that a team can choose to use. There's some examples there, some that you recognize and maybe some that are custom or in-house. And with those, I might build around them some communities of practice. And I might even have some combinations that says, you know, maybe for hardware, this is a good set to go with. Maybe for research, that's a good set to go with. But fundamentally, if I'm a team, I start with the things that are mandatory. In this case, it's that retrospectives thing and the compliance thing. And then I build into my way of working what's right for me. What's right for me right now? It might be that when I move to the next project, it changes. And then a different team will again have the things that are mandatory, and they might have a slightly different set of things that is right for them at this point. And they've got some custom things perhaps as well that aren't on the list on the left. And then I've got my other team. So you can see there that we can build up this kind of thin set of mandatory things that give the organization what it needs. So in this example, the organization knows that the stakeholders are being managed properly, the opportunity is being managed properly, and that might be the connection into the strategic vision and the maybe organizational OKRs. Our requirements are being done in a fairly consistent way because maybe that's important for the team of teams work, but largely beyond that, teams can choose roughly what they want to do. And I've built in some support around communities of practice, and this is something I might evolve. If it turns out that the compliance practice is less important for all the teams because maybe it's embedded into some of the automation, I could take that out, or I could put in something else if I wanted. So that's how Essence can help with transformation in two ways, either by defining practices smartly with principles and values in order to arrive at a desired culture through changing and reinforcing the correct mindset and behaviors and habits, or through the construction of a kind of custom way of working or a common operating model. The other phrase we use to describe this is minimum viable bureaucracy. Let's do the minimum we can to be consistent and coherent, and everything else is up to you, but there will be some form of bureaucracy that you all must fall in line with. So there's the two ways that Essence can help you with transformation change.